She was born with her eyes open, but the light never got in. The daughter of a Jiu-Jitsu black belt, a 7-year-old girl named Elena lived in a world where colors were just words others repeated sensorily without her being able to touch them. Her father, Marcelo, had spent 20 years mastering the body, learning to read movements before they happened, to anticipate takedowns, to transform brute force into precise technique. But, faced with his daughter's blindness, all that discipline was useless. He couldn't take down this invisible opponent. He couldn't protect her from what was coming. And what was coming was worse than he imagined, because Elena was about to discover that the world had no place for her as she was. Until a 12-year-old boy who lived in the back of a city shelter and whom no one looked at twice did something so simple and so impossible that it would change everything. But to understand the weight of that gesture, we have to go back to the beginning, to Elena's silence and the helplessness of a father who knew how to fight but didn't know how to save his own daughter from being forgotten. Elena had a way of tilting her head when someone spoke to her, as if she were trying to weigh the words in the air before answering. At school, she always sat in the same spot, the third desk in the second row, and ran her fingers along the edge of the desk with a repetitive back and forth motion, as if measuring something only she understood. During recess, she would lean against the wall near the cafeteria, where the smell of buttered bread clung to the warm air, and she would wait. She waited for someone to come talk, waited for a teacher to call her name, waited for time to pass. The other kids ran, shouted, formed groups that dissolved and reformed, but Elena remained there, motionless, like a rock in the middle of a river. Sometimes a classmate would approach, say hi in a loud, slow voice, as if Elena were also deaf, and then leave. Elena smiled. She always smiled, but the smile took an extra second to appear, and when it did, it looked rehearsed, as if she had learned that this was what people expected of her. At home, Marcelo watched his daughter with a painful intensity. He saw when she tripped on the living room rug, even after walking over it 1,000 times. He saw when she held her juice glass with both hands, gripping it too tightly, afraid of spilling. He saw when she paused in the hallway, lost for a second, trying to remember if the bathroom was to the right or the left. And most of all, he saw when Elena pretended everything was fine. She was 8 now, and she already knew how to lie. She said school was good, that she had made friends, that the teacher was nice. But Marcelo knew a lie. He knew the sound of a hitched breath, the way she turned her face away, the rush to change the subject. Elena lied to protect him, and that was the worst part. Marcelo was respected on the mat. His students called him Professor, with genuine reverence. The younger ones asked for advice. The older ones challenged him to test his technique and always lost. He had built that con sweat, repetition, discipline. He woke up at 5 in the morning, trained before opening the dojo, spent the day teaching, came home, and still did mobility exercises in the living room while Elena ate dinner. But none of that mattered when he saw his daughter come home from school with her shoulders slumped, dragging her backpack on the floor. Nothing mattered when he heard her crying softly in her room late at night, trying to muffle the sound into her pillow so he wouldn't hear. He heard. He always heard. And he would stand frozen in the hallway, leaning against the wall, clenching his fists until his nails dug into his palms, because he didn't know what to do. The meetings with the school started in the second half of the previous year. The principal, a woman in her 50s with thick-rimmed glasses and a professional voice, called Marcelo in to talk about Elena. He walked into the office expecting to hear about progress, about adjustment, about how his daughter was fitting in. Instead, he heard a list of problems. Elena wasn't participating in group activities. Elena wasn't keeping up with the class pace. Elena needed special attention that the school, unfortunately, wasn't equipped to provide. The principal delivered all this con a sad smile, hands clasped on the desk, as if delivering an unavoidable sentence. Marcelo asked what could be done. The principal sighed, adjusted her glasses, and suggested he consider other options more suitable for Elena's profile. He left that office feeling like he'd been gut-punched. Marcelo tried everything. He hired an educational psychologist who came twice a week and worked with Elena using braille materials and tactile games. The woman was competent, patient, but after 3 months she said Elena was emotionally blocked and that perhaps it would be good to look for a child psychologist. He looked. The psychologist, a young man with a trimmed beard and colorful sneakers, had 6 sessions with Elena and then asked to speak with Marcelo privately. He said the girl showed signs of childhood depression, that she felt isolated, that she needed consistent social stimulation and a more welcoming school environment. Marcelo asked how to achieve that if the school didn't want his daughter. The psychologist didn't have an answer. It was around this time that the looks started to change in the neighborhood. Marcelo felt it when he went into the grocery store, when he picked Elena up from school, when he walked past the little park. The other kids' mothers would chat in small groups, stop talking when he approached, and smile too quickly. He caught fragments. Poor little girl. Her dad is super protective, H? They say he won't accept her condition. She needs a specialized place. Marcelo didn't answer. He squeezed Elena's hand tighter and kept walking. But the anger built up, a dull, impotent rage, because he knew those women had kids who ignored Helena, who laughed when she bumped into something, who mimicked the way she walked. And nobody did anything. The last straw came on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks before the end of the school year. Marcelo got a call from the school asking him to pick up Elena immediately. When he arrived, he found his daughter sitting alone in the guidance counselor's office, her face swollen from crying. The counselor, a woman younger than the principal but with the same weary voice, explained that there had been an incident during gym class. Elena had gotten hurt. Nothing serious, but it was best to take her home. Marcelo asked what happened. The counselor hesitated, looked at Helena, and said the girl had tripped during a run. Marcelo knelt in front of his daughter, held her face with both hands, and asked. Helena didn't answer. He asked again, softer, firmer. Helena started crying again and said she had really tripped, that it was an accident, that she just wanted to go home. Marcelo found out the truth 2 days later, when a mother he barely knew stopped him on the street and told him her daughter had seen everything. Helena hadn't tripped. 2 girls had stretched a jump rope in front of her during a race to see if she'd notice. Elena fell flat on her face, banked her knee, and just stood there for a while trying to figure out what happened while the other kids laughed. The gym teacher didn't see it, or pretended not to see it. When he finally approached, he already had a story ready. Elena had tripped on her own. It was dangerous for her to participate in activities like that. It was better if she stayed out next time. The mother who told the story said she thought it was outrageous, that she was going to talk to the school, that this couldn't continue. Marcelo thanked her with a choked voice and went home. That night he couldn't sleep. He stayed in the living room, sitting in the dark, thinking about all the ways he had failed. If you believe every child deserves protection, comment protection. The next day, Marcelo went to the school without calling ahead. He asked to speak to the principal. She was busy. He said he would wait. He waited an hour and a half sitting in the reception area, watching the clock, fidgeting with his fingers. When he was finally called in, he entered the office and slowly closed the door. The principal started talking before he sat down, saying she understood his concern, but that they were just kids, that these things happened, that there was no point in making a drama out of it. Marcelo let her finish. Then, he asked to see the security footage from the playground. The principal said there were no cameras on the playground. He asked if the girls who did that had been punished. She said it was their word against Helena's, and that it wasn't fair to punish children without proof. Marcelo took a deep breath, gripped the edge of the desk, and said he was pulling Helena out of that school. The principal sighed in relief, as if she had been waiting for that all along, and said she thought it was a sensible decision, that there were specialized institutions, and she could even recommend some. Marcelo left without responding. But what did pulling Helena out of school mean? Putting her in a special school where she would be separated from the world, where she would never have contact with sighted children, where she would be treated as a separate category? Marcelo wouldn't accept it. It wasn't pride, it was conviction. He knew his daughter was smart, sensitive, capable. The problem wasn't with her. The problem was everyone who looked at her only saw the blindness, never the girl. But how to change that? How to make the whole world see differently? It was during this period of silent desperation that Marcelo started noticing the kid. He would show up sometimes near the gym, always late in the afternoon, when the last students were leaving. He'd stand across the street, leaning against a lamppost, watching. It wasn't a threatening look, it was an attentive, curious look. The kid seemed about 12, maybe 13, too skinny for his height, always wearing an old baseball cap pulled low and a beat-up backpack slung over one shoulder. He wore the same clothes almost every day, a faded gray t-shirt, denim shorts, ripped at the knee, sneakers without laces. Marcelo didn't know where he came from, but he had the feeling he'd seen him before, maybe walking by the farmer's market, maybe sitting in the town square. The kid never asked for anything, he just watched. One day, Marcelo crossed the street and walked over to him. The kid didn't run, but he tensed up, ready to bolt if necessary. Marcelo asked what he was doing there. The kid shrugged and said he was just looking. Marcelo asked if he wanted to train Jiu-Jitsu. The kid looked down at his own feet and said he didn't have any money. Marcelo said he wasn't charging. The kid looked up, suspicious, and asked why. Marcelo didn't have an answer right away. He just said he thought the kid might like it. The kid thought for a long moment, then nodded slowly and said maybe he'd come by. He didn't give his name. He walked away slowly, hands in his pockets, without looking back. The kid didn't show up the next day or the day after. Marcelo figured he wouldn't come anymore. But a week later, he was at the gym door right when the kids' class started, wearing the same clothes and the same backpack. Marcelo lent him an old gi, way too big, e let the kid watch the practice. Ele sentou no corner, leaning against the wall, following every move with unnerving focus. Ele não apertou nada, ele só viu. Ao final, Marcelo perguntou se ele gostava. O kid disse sim. Marcelo perguntou se voltaria. O kid disse maybe, e ele diz como back. Ele veio no dia seguinte, no dia depois e o dia depois disso. Sempre quieto, sempre observando. Foi somente na quarta semana que Marcelo lembrou seu nome, Lucas. E foi só porque um dos estudantes aspirou alto e Lucas anseiou quase acidentalmente, assim como fosse acostumado a ser invisível e não esperasse que ninguém se importasse. Marcelo também faltou alto, conversando com um local de social worker que Lucas vivia num city shelter 6 blocos à frente, que ele havia entrado lá aos 9 anos, após a mãe foi arrestada e não tinha parentes para tomar conta dele. Que era um kid tranquilo, no trouble, mas também sem chance de adoção porque era tão velho e porque tinha um histórico de attachment issues. Lucas foi à escola na manhã, retornava ao shelter na tarde e passava o resto do dia andando pelas ruas. Ninguém o contabilizava, ninguém perguntava onde ele estava. Ele era um gosto. Mas Lucas tinha algo que Marcelo teve um tempo para graspar. Ele via. Não só com seus olhos. Ele via as coisas que outros ignoravam. Ele via quando alguém estava triste mesmo sorrindo. Ele via quando alguém estava mentindo. He saw when someone needed space, or company, or silence. Marcelo realizou quando Lucas começou a ajudar durante o treino, organizando os guias, cleaning o mat, dando água para os mais novos. Ele nunca pedia para fazer isso, ele simplesmente fazia, e fazia com uma atenção aos detalhes que beirava o obsessivo. Ele foldava os guias com as edges perfeitamente alinhadas, cleanava o mat em círculos movimentados, não deixando um single spot. Ele sempre dava água aos kids após terminarem de rolar, não antes, porque ele havia observado que esse era o momento certo. Um sábado à tarde, Marcelo took Helena a gym. She had asked to see the place where her dad spent so much time. Marcelo ficou nervoso, porque o mat estava cheio de obstáculos e não sabia como Helena reagiria. Mas ela caminhou devagar, seu cane tapando no chão, e estou no centro, cheirando o suor e rabo, listando o muflado som de bodes caindo. Marcelo descreveu tudo a ela, onde as janelas eram, onde a fonte de água, o tamanho do mat, a altura do teto. Helena listou carinhosamente tudo, mas quando terminou, fez uma pergunta que ele não esperava. Is anyone here? Marcelo looked around. O gym estava vazio, prática estava acabada. Ele estava pronto a dizer não, mas então viu Lucas no canto, sentado no chão, perto da porta dos fundos, olhando Helena com uma expressão Marcelo não conseguia quase ler. There's one of my students. Lucas. Helena turned her head in Marcelo's direction, but seemed to be trying to locate something else. He's quiet, Marcelo confirmed. He's always quiet. Helena smiled, a small, genuine smile, different from the social smile she used with strangers. I like people who are quiet. Lucas slowly stood up and walked over to them. He stopped about 3 feet away, hands in his pockets, waiting. Marcelo introduced them. Lucas said hey in a low voice. Helena said hey back. And then something strange happened. Helena asked if he queria touch her cane. Lucas looked at Marcelo, asking silent permission. Marcelo nodded. Lucas carefully extended his hand, touched the cane, felt the weight, ran his fingers over the rubber grip. It's light, he said. It is, Helena replied, but I'm strong. Lucas smiled, a quick smile that vanished right away. I know. In the following weeks, something started brewing between the two. Nothing obvious, nothing forced. Lucas started showing up at the dojo at the same times Helena trained. He didn't say much, but he hung around like a silent satellite. Helena seemed more at ease when he was there. She asked questions she didn't ask anyone else. She asked what color the mats were. She asked if the gi felt heavy. She asked how Lucas had learned to tie certain knots. Lucas always answered patiently, using simple but precise words. He never dumbed it down, never treated Helena like she couldn't grasp it, and Helena noticed. Era Lucas que first realized Helena was getting worse. Marcelo saw his daughter was quieter, mais distante, Mas ele chalked it up to school stress, pent-up frustration. Lucas saw something else. Ele saw que Helena havia sentado de perguntar. Ele viu que agachava a cabeça mesmo quando ninguém estava à volta. Ele viu que havia começado a escrachar a palma com o seu unha, um movimento repetitivo inconsciente que deixava marcas em sua pele. Um dia, após uma sessão, Lucas pulled Marcelo aside e sem disse, "She's going downhill." Marcelo sentiu o estômago clanchar. "Como você sabe?" Lucas shrugged, mas não com indiferença, com desconforto. "Eu sei, eu já vi isso antes. She's giving up." Marcelo não queria acreditar isso, mas dessa noite ele foi entrar no quarto de Helena e viu sua filha sentada na cama, pernas dobradas ao redor da barriga, chorando silenciosamente. Ele sentou beside her e perguntou o que estava errado. Helena tomou um tempo para responder. Quando finalmente falou, sua voz era tão baixa que ele quase não a ouviu. "Eu não quero ir mais à escola." Marcelo sentiu algo bater dentro dele. Ele não podia tirar sua filha da escola sem ter onde mais colocá-la. Ele não podia sendê-la a um especializado centro através da cidade, onde ela seria mais uma invisível criança. Ele não podia mais continuar vendo sua filha fadigar lentamente. Ele esteve lá, no escuro do quarto, não sabendo o que dizer, não sabendo o que fazer, sentindo o peso de sua própria impotência. If you've ever seen someone suffer in silence, comment, "I have." It was Lucas who had the idea. He showed up at the gym 2 days later, earlier than usual, and asked to speak with Marcelo. There was something in his manner, a contained urgency, that made Marcelo stop what he was doing and pay attention. Lucas wasn't one to ask for favors. He waited for Marcelo to finish with a client, waited for the gym to empty out, and then said, straight up, "I know what Helena needs." Marcelo crossed his arms, skeptical. What does she need? Lucas looked down at his feet, gathered his courage, and said, "She needs to see the world her way. She needs to stop trying to be like everyone else." Marcelo frowned. "I've tried explaining that to her. It doesn't work." Lucas shook his head. "You explain with words. It has to be different." Lucas explained that he had an idea. At the shelter, he shared a room with a kid who had lost his sight in a car accident at 10. The kid had learned to manage on his own, and he had taught Lucas a few things. Simple things, but they made a difference. Ways to organize objects so you never lose them. Ways to count steps to memorize distances. Ways to use sound as a map. Lucas thought he could teach Helena. Not in a technical way, not like a professional, but as an equal. Like someone who understood what it was like to be ignored, what it was like to be underestimated, what it was like to constantly have to prove you existed. Marcelo meant no. He meant that it made no sense, that Lucas was a child, that Helena necessitava professional help, that he couldn't put this responsibility on a 12-year-old kid. Marcelo watched Lucas. He saw something that made him hesitate. He saw determination. He saw purpose. He saw an invisible kid asking to be seen. Marcelo asked for time to think. He talked to the educational psychologist, who said the idea not wasn't crazy, but needed supervision. He talked to the therapist, who said that horizontal bonds could be therapeutic, but it was important not to create unrealistic expectations. He talked to himself in the silence of the early morning and decided he had nothing left to lose. Helena was sinking. He had already tried everything that was right, everything that was appropriate, and nothing had worked. Maybe it was time to try something different. Marcelo called Helena and Lucas and explained the proposal. Helena listened carefully but said nothing. Lucas was also quiet, waiting. Marcelo asked what Helena thought. She took a while to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was so small it almost vanished into the air. "I want to try." Lucas started slowly. On the first day, he took Elena to the gym and asked her to stand in the center of the mat. He'd said they were going to do exercise. He would clap in different places, and she had to point to where the sound came from. Marcelo watched from the corner, arms crossed, heart tight. Elena missed the first few times. She pointed left when the sound came from the right. She pointed up when the sound came from below. Lucas didn't correct her with words. He simply clapped again, slower, and waited. Elena tried again. She missed again. Lucas kept going. He clapped 50 times, 100 times, until Elena started getting it right more often. When she finally got it right 5 times in a row, Lucas said, "Now you know where I am, even without seeing me." In the following days, Lucas taught her other things. He taught Elena how to count steps from one place to another, always starting with the right foot, always at the same pace. He taught her to use the cane not just to detect obstacles, but to measure distances, tapping twice on the floor and listening to the echo. He taught her to organize the objects in her backpack always in the same order, so she would never lose anything. He taught her to identify textures with her fingertips, closing her eyes and touching different materials until she could distinguish metal from plastic, wood from glass, cotton from silk. Lucas didn't use jargon. He didn't use technical terms. He showed, repeated, waited. And Elena absorbed everything with a hunger Marcelo hadn't seen in months. The change wasn't immediate. It was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. Marcelo noticed when Elena stopped tripping over the living room rug. He noticed when she started walking faster down the hall without hesitation. He noticed when she started grabbing her juice glass with one hand, confidently. But the most important change was something else. Elena started talking again. She started making jokes. She started complaining when she was hungry, saying when she was tired, asking to do things. She came back to existence as a person, not as a problem. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, almost 2 months after Lucas had started working with Elena, that the impossible happened. Marcelo was locking up the gym when he heard a noise coming from the mat. He went in and saw Lucas and Helena in the center, facing each other. Lucas had his eyes blindfolded with a black strip. Elena was holding the cane with both hands, as if it were a staff. Lucas said, "Now you're going to teach me." Marcelo stood frozen in the doorway, not breathing. Elena hesitated, but then started speaking. She told Lucas to take 3 steps forward. He obeyed. She told him to turn 90 degrees to the left. He turned. She told him to reach out his hand and touch whatever was in front of him. Lucas reached out and touched the wall. Elena smiled, a wide, genuine smile Marcelo hadn't seen in years. "You did it," she said. "You saw without looking." Lucas pulled off the blindfold, blinked a few times to adjust to the light, and looked at Helena with an expression Marcelo had never seen before. It wasn't pride, it wasn't victory, it was something deeper. It was recognition. Helena was no longer the girl he was helping. She was someone who had something to teach. She was someone who knew things he didn't. She was someone who was. Marcelo felt his throat tighten. He felt his eyes sting. He tried to hold it in, but he couldn't. He left the dojo, crossed the street, leaned against the wall on the other side, and broke down. He cried like he hadn't cried in years, his whole body shaking, his hands clenched against his face. He cried with relief. He cried with gratitude. He cried because finally, someone had seen his daughter. And that someone was an invisible kid no one looked at twice. When Marcelo returned, he found Elena and Lucas sitting on the mat, talking quietly. He approached slowly, still trying to control his breathing. Lucas looked at him and tensed up, as if expecting to be kicked out. Marcelo knelt between them, looked at Lucas, and said, "Thank you." The voice came out hoarse, broken. Lucas didn't answer. He just lowered his head, his ears turning red. Elena reached out, found her father's hand, and squeezed it. "Lucas is my friend," she said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Marcelo nodded, even though he knew she couldn't see. "I know." If you think Lucas deserves a shot, drop his name in the comments. In the following months, Elena started going back to school. Not because the school had changed, but because Helena had changed. She walked into the classroom with her head held high, sat at the same old desk, but now organized her supplies with an efficiency that impressed the teachers. She used techniques Lucas had taught her. The pencil case always went in the top right corner of the desk, the notebook in the center, the water bottle in the bottom left corner. She never lost anything. She never knocked anything over. And when someone tried to make fun of her, Elena would respond, not with anger, with calm, with a confidence that disarmed them. One girl once asked, loudly enough for the whole class to hear, why Elena used a cane if she couldn't see at all. Elena turned toward the voice and said, "I use it because I know how to use it. Do you know how to use your sight? Or do you only know how to judge people who are different?" The room fell silent. The girl didn't answer. Marcelo started getting calls from the school, but now they were different calls. The English teacher wanted to know if Elena was interested in entering an essay contest. The science teacher wanted to include Helena in a fair project. The coordinator wanted to talk about integration possibilities. Marcelo listened to it all with a mix of skepticism and hope. He didn't trust the school, but he trusted his daughter. Lucas kept showing up at the gym every day. Marcelo had offered for him to train real Jiu-Jitsu, not just watch. Lucas aceitou, mas em uma condição. Ele queria ajudar com os menores kids, os que tinham dificuldade em aprender os moves. Marcelo achou estranho, mas deixou. E ele descobriu que Lucas tinha um natural talento para ensinar. Ele era paciente, observador e sabia exatamente o que cada kid precisava ouvir. Ele nunca iolou, ele nunca ficou anoiado. Ele simplesmente repetia as mesmas vezes necessárias até o kid entendesse. Foi durante uma casual conversa após um workout que Marcelo perguntou a Lucas por que ele gostava tanto de ajudar. Lucas pensou por um longo tempo, seus olhos fixos no chão, e então disse: "Quando era litinho, ninguém tomou a iniciativa de me ensinar. Tive que ficar tudo no meu jeito. E é muito mais difícil assim. Eu não quero que outras pessoas passem por isso." Marcelo sentiu algo chifrar em seu ser. Uma ideia. Ou melhor, não era uma ideia, mas uma necessidade. Ele havia visto o que Lucas havia feito por Helena. Ele havia visto como um kid que era praticamente invisível, não training, não recursos, havia atingido algo que profissionais não podiam. E ele havia visto como Lucas tinha crescido no processo, ao como ele havia achado propósito, ao como ele havia começado a acreditar que podia ser mais do que um gosto. Marcelo startou de gar. Ele leu sobre inclusão programas, técnicas de ensino para pessoas com visuais e sucessivos projetos sociais. Ele conversou com outros jiu-jitsu instrutores, sócio-trabalhadores e psicólogos, e pôs tudo no papel. Ele estava transformando o gym, um espaço inclusivo. He would start free classes for blind or low vision kids. He would train Lucas and other young volunteers to see assistants. He would create a project that proved inclusion wasn't about charity, but about respect. It took 6 months to get the project approved by the city council, secure donations for adapted Gs, and convince other parents to let their kids join. But when the first class finally kicked off, Marcelo felt like he had closed a loop. Elena was there, not as a special student, but as an assistant. Lucas was there, wearing a brand new white G, teaching a 6-year-old how to tie their belt. And Marcelo was there, watching, his chest tight with pride. The news spread like wildfire. Local papers ran stories about the black belt who opened the mats to blind kids. A TV station visited the dojo and did a segment. Marcelo was interviewed, but he deflected every question toward Lucas and Helena. He didn't want to be the hero of the story, because he wasn't. The hero was an invisible kid who had seen what no one else could. The buzz brought unexpected consequences. Other gyms started adopting similar programs. Schools began reaching out to Marcelo to give talks on inclusion. Parents of children with disabilities started showing up, asking for advice, asking for help, asking for hope. Marcelo answered everyone with the same message: "I'm not the one you need to hear from. It's Lucas." Lucas was 14 when he was oficialmente invitado a ser assistente instrutor no gym. Marcelo ofereceu salário baixo, mas o suficiente para Lucas começar a ganhar independência. Lucas aceitou, mas com uma condição: queria parte do dinheiro usado para ajudar outras crianças do abrigo. Marcelo agrediu, e juntos criaram uma bolsa de estudo para teens vulneráveis para aprenderem Jiu-Jitsu e se tornarem coaches. Helena foi tenente quando ganhou sua primeira medalha em regional adaptado de Jiu-Jitsu Championship. Ela subiu no pódio, segurando a medalha com os 2 braços, seu rosto voltado para onde sabia que seu pai estava, e sorriu. Marcelo craiu again, mas desta vez ele não precisou escondê-lo. Se você acredita que família é uma escolha, comente family. O mais importante change, however, wasn't public. It was private. It happened on a Sunday night, 6 meses após a primeira inclusão class. Marcelo estava no living room, repampeando, quando Helena walked in e sentou nesto ele. Ela ficou quieta por tempo, e then she said, "Dad, I want to thank you." Marcelo put down the book and turned to her. "Thank me for what?" Helena tomou momento para responder. "For not giving up on me. For letting Lucas help me. For believing I could be more than everyone thought." Marcelo sentiu seu troto taitar again. Ele puxou sua filha em abraço, esquezou-a tight e disse, "I was never going to give up on you." Never. Helena rested her head on his shoulder and stayed there, in silence, just feeling a security of being close. After Helena went to sleep, Marcelo went out onto the porch. The night was cold, the sky full of stars that Helena would never see. He thought about everything that had happened in the last few years. He thought about how he had almost lost his daughter to disaster. He thought about how he had been so focused on finding professional, technical, appropriate solutions that he had almost ignored the solution that was right in front of him. An invisible kid. A kid no one looked at. A kid who had truly seen Helena, not as a problem, but as a person. Marcelo also thought about how cruel society is to those who don't fit the mold. How the school had failed, how the parents had failed, how even the professionals, with all good intentions, had failed. Because everyone had looked at Helena and only seen the blindness. Everyone except Lucas. Lucas had looked and seen an intelligent, capable, strong girl, and he had decided she deserved the chance to prove it. The next day, Marcelo called Lucas in for a talk. They sat down on the mat after everyone else had left, and Marcelo said something he had been thinking about for weeks. I want you to live with us. Lucas froze. He looked at Marcelo as if he hadn't understood. What? Marcelo repeated, slowly. I want you to live with us. I already spoke to the social worker. I've started the guardianship process. If you want to, you can leave the group home and come live with us. You, me, and Elena. Lucas hung his head, shoulders tight. He stayed silent for a long time. Marcelo didn't push. He just waited. When Lucas finally lifted his face, tears were streaming down. He tried to wipe them with the back of his hand, quickly, as if embarrassed. Why? The voice came out broken. Marcelo moved closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. Because you're family. Because you did for her what I couldn't. Because you deserve a place that's yours. And because I learned from you that family isn't just blood, it's a choice. Lucas cried harder, his whole body shaking. Marcelo pulled him into a hug, and Lucas led him for the first time since they had met. They stayed like that for a long time, in the silence of the mat, while outside the city kept moving, indifferent, but in there something had changed forever. Lucas moved out 3 months later. The social worker approved temporary custody with periodic check-ins. Lucas got his own room, small but tidy, with a bed, a desk, and a bookshelf. He didn't have many things to put on the shelf, but Marcelo said they would fill it together, over time. The adjustment wasn't perfect. Lucas had nightmares sometimes, and Marcelo would hear him pacing the hall in the middle of the night, trying to count down. Elena heard it too, and she would go to his room, knock on the door, and ask if everything was okay.
Lucas always said yes, mas Helena iria em qualquer casa e sentar no chão, conversando sobre coisas simples até que ele pudesse dormir novamente. Os três estabeleceram uma rotina. Breakfast together before heading to school, lunch at the gym on weekdays, dinner at home, com cada pessoa contando o que havia acontecido durante o dia. On Saturdays, they watched movies com audiodescrição chosen by Helena. On Sundays, they would take walks in the park, with Helena e Lucas guiding Marcelo blindfolded just so he could understand what it was like to trust other senses. Marcelo realizou que havia aprendido mais com esses dois nos últimos 4 anos do que em 20 anos de Jiu-Jitsu. Ele havia aprendido que strength não era só física, que discipline não era só seguir regras, que família não era só biologia, e que ver não tinha nada a ver com os olhos. Comente Guts se você fizesse o mesmo. 1 ano depois, à festa de aniversário de Helena, Marcelo olhou ao redor e viu algo que ele havia nem imaginado. A casa estava cheia, kids do dojo correndo ao redor do jardim, são blind, são não, todos plandando juntos sem distinção. Lucas no centro, organizando um jogo, sorrindo de uma forma que parecia impossível para o garoto fechado que havia aparecido no dojo years atrás. Helena nem estava conversando com uma amiga de escola, lá rindo alto, sem ter vergonha de ser julgado. E aí, naquele caótico, noisoso, perfeito momento, Marcelo entendeu o que havia conseguido. Ele não havia derrotado a cegueira. He hadn't changed the world, but he had created a space where his daughter could exist fully. And he had given an invisible kid a chance to be seen. Later, when the guests left and the house returned to silence, Elena and Lucas sat in the living room with Marcelo. Elena was tired but happy. Lucas was quiet but relaxed. Marcelo looked at the two of them and felt something he couldn't name. It wasn't pride, it wasn't relief, it was something bigger. It was the certainty that he had done the right thing, that he had chosen right, that he had trusted the right people. Elena broke the silence. Dad, Lucas told me that when he was little, he thought he would never have a family. Marcelo looked at Lucas, who looked away, uncomfortable. "And now?" Marcelo asked. Lucas took a moment to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but firm. "Now I do." If this part resonated with you, drop a comment about where you're watching from. This story could end here, but it doesn't. Because the change that started in that dojo with an invisible kid and a blind girl spread. Other towns started copying the model. Other families started looking for outside-the-box solutions. Other kids started being truly seen, not as problems to be fixed, but as people to be respected. Lucas became an official instructor at 17. He awarded his first black belt at 21. Today, at 23, he coordinates the inclusion program for 3 dojos and gives talks at schools about empathy and respect. He still lives with Marcelo and Elena, but now he has his own car, his own income, his own dreams. And when people ask him what changed his life, he always gives the same answer. Someone saw me, and I decided to see others too. Elena graduated high school with honors. She got into college for psychology. She wants to work with vulnerable children. She wants to help others find what she found, a place in the world where they can exist without having to apologize. She still uses a cane, she is still blind, she still faces daily struggles. But now she faces them with the certainty that she is not alone. Marcelo keeps teaching Jiu-Jitsu. But now, when he looks at the mat and sees kids of all kinds training together, he remembers the day he almost gave up. He remembers the desperation of thinking he couldn't save his daughter. He remembers the humiliation of being ignored by the school. He remembers the helplessness of not knowing what to do. And most of all, he remembers the invisible kid who showed up out of nowhere and changed everything. A few months ago, Marcelo received an email from a mother he didn't know. The woman explained that her daughter had lost her sight in an accident and that the family was devastated, not knowing how to help. She had seen a news story about the gym and wanted to know if there were still openings in the program. Marcelo respondeu o mesmo dia. Ele disse que havia sempre aberturas. Ele disse que ela não estava sozinha. Ele disse que havia pessoas dispostas a ajudar, mesmo se fossem invisíveis à primeira vista. E ele agendou uma visita. Quando a mulher apareceu com sua filha, uma menina de 8 anos com olhos abaixados e ombros encolhidos, Marcelo viu Helena em ela. Ela viu o medo, a vergonha, o isolamento. Mas ele também viu a possibilidade. Ele chamou Lucas e pediu que conversasse com a garota. Lucas aproximou-se lentamente, neutou em frente dela e disse: "Você não está quebrada. Você só precisa aprender a enxergar em um outro lugar, e eu posso te ensinar." A garota olhou alto, não com seus olhos, mas com seu rosto, e pela primeira vez em meses, ela sorriu. Marcelo observou a cena de longe, seus olhos enchendo-se, e ele sabia que o ciclo estava continuando, que o que havia começado com desespero e pena tinha transformado em algo maior, que um invisível querido havia criado um ripple que agora estava tocando outras vidas, e que sua filha, a garota o mundo tinha tentado apagar, estava ajudando a criar um diferente mundo. Dessa noite, sentado na Porsche, Marcelo olhou para o céu e pensou em tudo o que havia aprendido. Ele pensou em como a sociedade era rápida a julgar e lenta a ajudar. Ele pensou em como as instituições falhavam com quem mais precisava. Ele pensou em como a força física era inútil quando o adversário era invisível. Mas mais de tudo, ele pensou em como, sem dúvida, a solução estava onde ninguém estava olhando. In a forgotten kid, in an underestimated child, in a simple gesture that seemed impossible. He thought of Elena, sleeping in her room, safe and confident. He thought of Lucas, studying in the living room, planning the next day's lesson.
He thought of all the kids still suffering in silence, waiting for someone to truly see them. And he made a silent promise that he would keep going, that he would fight, that he would teach others to see beyond the obvious. Because in the end, that's what Lucas had done. He had seen Elena, not the blindness, not the problem, not the inability. He had seen the girl, and he had decided she deserved to be seen by everyone. And that, Marcelo knew, was the only victory that truly mattered.